The Backyard Mystic. LOL. Well, there was a time in college when I was sleeping in the basement down in a house near campus, and I woke up, found myself awake, early morning, early a.m., 2 or 3 a.m., no, probably 4 or 5, and I saw a bluish head of Edgar Casey floating in the air, just going by. And then I thought, and that was like a drop of water going into a well, and it hit the surface and went out in ripples towards the sides. And I thought, no, wait. And that fell and created more ripples. And I said, that was the wrong thing to do. And stop. And that fell, and even more ripples. And the more I tried to stop, the more drops fell into this pool and created more and more ripples of noise. And this proceeded for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it was like how a hill is, lawns are terraced, and I kind of like a quantitatively down to another level, and there was even more noise. And after a bit, another quantitative slope down into another level of even more noise. And there were several of these levels going down, but going increasingly more noise. And then, all of a sudden, every cell in my body, every single cell, checked in. Like, hello, we're awake. And I hadn't realized that they'd all been offline, so to speak, And all of a sudden, I became aware of they all checked in at once, And so then this process of terracing became more gradual. I mean, the flat parts became a little longer, and the drops and terrace became a little less abrupt, steep, and so eventually I got up, and just the morning was just very calm inside, and unusual for I wasn't a noisy person anyway. I didn't listen to the radio and those kinds of things, and but it was even more quiet in some ways. Well, that's what happened. I don't know why. It just did. And then I want to include somebody else's experience that he related to me, because it became an experience in itself 40 years later to me. Around that same time in college, I was a member of a group, Carol Rom, and we used to go out to, I think it was Estacada, for a group, maybe 12 of us. And there he had a visitor from the Middle East. He'd been to the Middle East, and this man was probably 40-ish or so, I would think. And 40, 50, and one day he and I were talking, and he related to me this story. And I don't know why he related to me this story, but he did. And he said, when he was living in the Middle East, because this was in Portland, Oregon, um, uh, he had some questions to ask of somebody we'll call a head man. Um, Probably about life, spiritual nature, life. And so he traveled to this man's house, and he got there, and there were others sitting on the floor waiting for an audience, the chance to speak with the head man. And so my acquaintance went up, and I don't know if he said hi or whatever they do, and but anyways, he sat down to wait his turn. And after he'd been there for several days, he decided that maybe he would go. He hadn't had a chance to talk to the head man, and so he got up and to go to the head man, and he would to say his goodbyes and thank yous and everything. And he sat down in front of this man to say goodbye. And he looked into the eyes of the man, and no thoughts came to his mind to say. He couldn't think of anything to say. And as he looked into the eyes of this man, the room became darker and darker until only the eyes of the man he could see, looking back into his own. And then his life began to regress and play back to him. And he went back, childhood and back, and a baby, and back. He was in the womb as a fetus, and back. And as he was regressing, he saw, when he was in his mother's womb, as she was crossing a footbridge near a certain village, she fell into the water and exclaimed some exclamation. And he regressed further and further back into the moment of conception. Now, after he left the head man's abode, he went to his mom, who was still alive, and he asked her, when I was in the womb at such and such a time, did you, outside of this certain village, fall off the footbridge and say these things as you fell into the water? And she was a bit taken aback because she had never told anybody this. Well, this was a rather interesting experience. And why he told me this, I don't know. But I was probably 18 or 20 at the time. And now, 50 years later, there's this huge debate on abortion in the United States. And that, for some reason, I ran across a database of all the churches in the United States, some 90,326 or something it was, 97. And I got it in my mind that I would fax this story or email this story to this database. So now, you know, I'm not a rich man, you know. I was on Social Security of, you know, $650 a month, but I had credit cards. I'm always a big one for credit cards, you know. A lot of people, you know, worry about their balance, and I'm more concerned about what's left up to the credit limit that I have to spend. I mean, that's the way I look at a credit card is how, if there's $500 left up to the credit limit, I've got $500 to spend. The balance, I don't know. I pay the minimum every month. What does it matter? Just roll it over. Anyway, so I purchased the database, you know, it was $300 or something, and I contacted somebody, and I talked to them about it, and so I wrote up this one-page experience of this man, you know. So this was a good 60, and this must have been 70 or 80 years after he visited the head man, right? And so he was probably dead at this point when I was doing this. And, you know, it cost, I don't know, $2,500 or so in tech fees to, you know, to handle the database and get everything, you know, get it done. You know, you can't just send out 90,000 emails. But anyway, so that was done. And because it's a very interesting thing to reflect on, you know, and that is that your consciousness is fully developed at conception. A very interesting point, you know, because people are concerned about whether there's life in the fetus or, you know, this kind of thing. Well, this is a very clear indication that, example that can be added to the dialogue now to the Church of the United States, that your consciousness is fully developed, does not require a brain structure, a physical brain structure, to be fully aware of your experiences and what you're experiencing. What is you then? You see, you is not the physical structure. You is an existence before the physical structure. And what happens on birth is you forget all this stuff. You know, who can remember that stuff? You know, as a consequence, we think consciousness and self-consciousness, self-awareness, begins after the brain develops. But this apparently is not true. And we don't accept a lot of experiences like this because we want instrumentation. We want to go from the outside in to investigate life. But you can go from the inside out, in which case you can have more complete knowledge more quickly, because science will probably never be able to determine when self-awareness arises. So this is valuable, and I think this experience is valuable, but I think it's peculiar of why this head man did this to this acquaintance, that it got to me, and 50 years later, half a century, I recall it and give it to the church when they are very much in need of understanding life. Well, another experience was very traumatic and happened to me when I was in swaddling clothes and in a crib, as a baby, of course, right? Probably 2-3 months old. And my mom would put me down, and then what happened would be this terrible ogre, a terrible, terrible creature, would come out from behind the radiator and come to get me. And I was so terrified because it was coming to get my soul. It was coming to get my very soul of existence and obliterate it, to take it away from me, to for all eternity. I would lose my very soul, and I would scream for my mother, and I would go down into the bottom under the covers, and it would lift up the covers and look in it with these yellow eyes, and I screamed, for help. And this happened night after night, and my parents, of course, never knew why I was screaming. But you can imagine the terror to have some terrible, terrible ogre come to take your existence away from you and obliterate you for eternity. It just, my God, the terror. And so I would kick the board at the bottom of the crib out, and one day, and of course they had to put it back in, every day. And one day my mom had me in her arms, and she kind of tilted, I was, a foot and a half tall or something, and she tilted me towards the crib as she was bringing me into the crib, and she said, "Look, Sean, you kicked it out again last night. It's kind of like, why do you keep doing this for whatever you see?" But you see, I remember her words. I remember why she was doing this. I remember why she was tilting me. I remember that they had to put it back in. I was causing them this little bit of task, and all this stuff, and yet I was only a couple months old. And it's just you see, this is again is the I was fully aware. How did I understand English? See, how did I understand motive? See, again, the consciousness was, was fully there. And I can see it as though I could see the two of us together, as though I was observing it from a little bit above, that I could see her holding me in her arms, and her standing there from head to toe, even though I couldn't have seen her with my eyes, being in that position. So, well, it's very interesting, it's very interesting, the thing that one can experience. And then a few years later, we moved from Massachusetts to Knoxville, Tennessee, and living out in Bearden. I was in the second or third grade. And it was very funny at night, I would hear these distant drums. And my father used to read Kipling, Rikki Tikki Tavi, and the boom lay, boom lay, boom lay, boom. And it was this boom lay, boom lay. I don't know that he was reading it then to me, but just, it was kind of off in the distance about, it wasn't boom like that. It was just like just a sense of distant drums of the universe of some kind, just in the darkness, a void, pulsating, some kind of significant drum type, not just subtle, and just I'd lay there and wonder. My mind was drift off into these, not asleep, but just into these distance aways. It's almost like The Heart of Darkness by, who was that guy? Can't remember his name now. And then, some years later, after, I was involved in a little bit of meditation, Buddhism, and not too religiously, too assiduously. And Nichiren Shoshu of America was involved in that. But in Portland, I was now about 25. I went camping with two buddies of mine. And we went out into, I think it was Idaho somewhere, and up in the low mountains. And evening we had a campfire going, just the three of us, and it was dark, maybe 10 o'clock at night, and I thought, well, I'll just go for a walk. I just stood up and went off and started wandering up through the trees up the side of the mountain, hill kind of there. And after I'd gone a ways, I heard my friends calling me, Sean, and as though they were urging me on. And I continued walking. It's dark. There must have been a bit of a moon. There were no trails. And I got up a ways, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes maybe, I don't know. Lost track of time. But I stopped in front of a silver spur. Got leveled off somewhere. Now, a silver spur, as you know, is one of these, it's like a bristlecone pine, where it's all desiccated and it's turned silver. And it's very brittle and everything. And this was kind of a large, maybe a half a foot in diameter, I don't know, 15, 20 feet. And it had the branches and stuff. And I stopped in front of it. It must have been a moon of some kind. And there was a branch in front of me, a little horizontal branch about a foot long, maybe a half an inch in diameter. And I reached down to the ground and picked up another little piece, and I thumped it on the little branch and went thump, thump, and went out to the end and went thump, thump, and and it's dark, and I don't really know what kind of animals are around, and so when I beat it on the larger thump, thump, the sound went out into the forest, and I was a little bit apprehensive, and so I went down into the sturdier part and went thump, thump, and the fear dissipated, and I became more self-confident because the sound wasn't going out. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And so I went, thump, thump, and the fear came back. I went, thump, and it dissipated. I went, thump, 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 thump. And I noticed that something was going on inside of me. And there was this dichotomous of this thump, thump, and a fear, and a thump, thump, thump. And, well, I don't know. After a bit, I just wandered back to camp. And honestly, how did I get back to camp? I don't know. There are no trails. I don't know where I was going. It's too far away to hear or see him. I don't know. Anyway, so sometime later, maybe a couple of months or so, I and my wife at the time, and he and his wife went on a camping trip to Victoria Island, and we were going to go visit the old village, Indian village of Cloose, Cloose, apostrophe in the middle, and so there was a lake, and I believe it was Lake Kinnickinnick, fairly large lake, inlet lake, and we got a couple canoes, and we paddled down until we got to the wood footpath that led to Cloose, and we went there. And so that evening, a couple of fisher boats came in, and there was a little inlet there. And they came in, and we chatted and got friendly, and they brought some salmon in, and we had beans and rice and stuff, and we had a little beach meal there, a bunch of us. In the morning, I was stirring coffee, and I don't know why, but I was stirring it one way, and I stirred it the other, and something funny happened. I stirred it that way, and I stirred it the other way, and that way, and again, this little something was happening. So I did it one way, this happened. Did it the other way, that happened. This way and that way. It was very curious, And then my friend Steve said something, and so I, we carried on. Well, again, I didn't think much of it. Curious thing. And so about 2 months after that, I was back in Portland, and that afternoon I decided to go for a walk, So I just walked out the door that summer day, and I went about a block and a half to a vacant lot near the power substation there, and I was standing there, and I was looking down at the cracks on the sidewalk, and I noticed there was a little group of cracks. One looked like an ampersand, I said, well, that's curious. Okay, ampersand. Well, I thought to myself, it could be an S. Could be an ampersand. Could be an S. Could be an ampersand. Could be an S. And as I was doing this, of course, I wasn't changing my eyes or my position or anything. I was just imagining in my mind, I was just observing it as an S, and then I would observe it as an ampersand, right? And this funny thing started happening in my brain again. And so I went, S, ampersand. Curious, S, ampersand. And then, as I started to go from ampersand to S, my brain, there's an autofill function, it turns out, visualizes S for me in advance of my intentionally visualizing it. Oh, that's curious. So I said, well, okay, and I started back to the ampersand, and my my autofill, put it in again. And I said, well, that's kind of annoying. I don't like it. So I went from ampersand. So I started to go to S, and my autofill jumped in, and I said, no, ampersand, to fool it, right? so it goes, okay, ampersand. And so I go S, and it jumps in, and I go the other way, right? And then, what happens? Autofill, the neural nets have nothing on autofill. It got the picture that I was going to fool it, that I was not fool it, but I was going to change my mind, right? So it started changing it. So I'd go ampersand S. No, it would go S ampersand. And so I thought this was curious. This is a bit of a tussle. What happens if I do a third jerk, ampersand S, ampersand, And so now what I did is I didn't pre-program it. I waited until my autofill started to do anything, and I just jerked it the other way, right? Whatever, I go, and it would jump in and say, okay, I know where you're. I said, nope, going the other way. I never had my parents never taught me to do this. They never told me this kind of stuff would happen to me, and so I did this several times, it would start, and I would just jerk it the other way. It gave up. Honestly, it just gave up. It reminds me of the dog. I mean, we had an Airedale one time. You have to establish that you're the alpha male, right? Well, one of the ways you do is you knock the dog over. You're playing your hands and knees, and at one point you just knock it over with your shoulder, and you sit on top of its chest. Put your hands on its throat. Now, you don't hurt it. Just put your hands on its throat, and it'll avoid contact, because it doesn't want to capitulate. And you just be a little more insistent with your hand on its throat, and it gets the idea, right? And it just gives up, Its legs and everything just splay out. He just, his head goes back. His throat is obvious. He gives up. He capitulates to you. He accepts you as you're the dominant one. Okay? And that's exactly what my mind did. It just gave up, but it disappeared. I mean, it just vanished. It was just amazing. Who would thought that your mind would just give up on you like that? And then this wonderful thing happened. It was just like this pleasurable, peaceful bliss just flowed all around me. I was just, the afternoon, it was just flowed right out of me. It was just really neat. Anyway, so there's another experience for you. Now, here's another one. And when I related this in Facebook, Caravanserai, I got accused by some women of being misogynist. But I wasn't. Here's what happened. There were two women. I was about, 26, 5, or 8, 9, I don't know, somewhere in there. And, I must have been 30 or so. It was after I was married and divorced. But anyway, these two women, we were all about the same age. And we were walking down right almost in front of my house on the block. I think I had known them. They were just acquaintances. We'd been at a class together or something. I don't know what it was. I never saw them again after this, and I saw them, I don't know how we got together. But it was a very sunny, nice, pleasant afternoon. And we were walking around, and there were two women. I'll call June, the younger one, and Mary, the older one. And So Mary was on my left and June was on my right, and I just turned to them, and I just had it in my mind I wanted to do this, Well, I was just what's following, and I said, and I started talking. I had just been interested talking about the Socratic question. At the time, I didn't know. I imagined the Socratic question was asking a question from a question, but I made anyway. So anyway, I started in, and I started talking to both of them about this question and such and such. And while I was doing this, I began to talk to Mary in another channel. In other words, I was speaking words to June about the question and this and that. And while I was doing it, as I'm doing now, I was communicating with Mary that I wanted to talk to her on this channel while I was talking to June. And June was not aware, because I was cloaking what I was doing with, psychologically, I was cloaking this channel from June, and Mary saw that June could not tell what I was doing with Mary, and we were going to play a little game, adult hide and seek, with June. And so while I was talking like this, and they were both at the same distance from me, I was carrying on this conversation ostensibly with June, but at the same time I had these extraneous other nonverbal cues that I was communicating with Mary. And while I was talking with June and keeping her occupied, I was telling Mary that the deal was that when I finished talking, ostensibly, I was going to ask a question, and that she was to answer it with a question in order to determine that, in fact, June had been cloaked from hearing what was really going on. And Mary understood and agreed. And we had this communication, actually, right when June was standing there looking at me, and I was talking to her just like this. And so I got to the end, and I said, okay, we kind of wrapped it up with June. And I said to June, did you understand what I said? And June says, yes. Okay, did she? And so I turned to Mary, and I said, did you understand what I said? And Mary says, what do you think? See? And anyway, so I said, okay. And I can't stop Mary from asking questions. Every time I say something, she'll ask a question. And I have to go, Mary, stop. And she says, are you sure? And I said, wait a minute, it's over. She says, what? What, do you expect me to believe that? And it took me about 5 minutes just to get her to stop. And the game was over. And June was sitting there with big puzzles on her face. I mean, it was I don't know what I was doing. I never had any training in this. I had no, I don't know. Still to this day, I don't know what's happening. Well, I do now, but anyway, so it was humorous. But see, here's another experience. Right, see, the backyard mystic. Anyway, so you see, and the other interesting thing is that you can communicate actual quantitative things without words. At the same time, you're communicating with words, some specifics. You can be communicating with, in another way, also words. And in fact, you can cloak this process from people. Now, the interesting thing here is that why did I choose the pair, the two roles like that? And the reason is, of course, because June would not have done well with the second, with this other channel, and Mary, if I tried to cloak it from Mary, she would have heard what was going on, because they had two different capabilities. And how did I know that? Really, look at these experiences. I had no training. How do I know this stuff? How is it I do these things? They just happen to me. Mom. Well, there's another interesting one that I had. I was teaching math at Clackamas Community College, and I wrote this up. And I found that in a student would ask me for a question, and I'd go over, and what I did was I listened to the question, and then I would ask them to attempt to solve it, and talk to me as they were. I think I did, as they were, at least I was listening in some way to them, what they were thinking. And I would see what they were doing, and I could tell that at some point their logic jumped the track, And of course they'd end up in a dead end. Once you jump the track, you're going to end up in a train wreck. And so they would turn to me and say, fix it, or fix me. Okay. At that time, they turned. I would create a question for them, and they, instead of answering their question, I would create a question, and they would think about what I had just asked, and as their minds solved that question, it dawned on them how to solve the thing that they were called me over for. In other words, I listened to their logic and the way they were thinking, and when they turned to me for assistance or whatever, I gave them a question that I had formulated right on the spot, according to their capabilities and where they were, such that when they solved my question, their brain would create the tools necessary to solve the problem that they were working on. Well, I don't understand that. Why would I do that? Nobody ever taught me to do that. Again, another experience, What is life all about? What am I all about? Is this me? Anyway, so that was interesting. It's terribly interesting. I find people's minds terribly interesting. And there were students there and working on the same problem, of course, and everybody approached it from a different direction. It was like you have a mountain and everybody's going up it from different sides. The same question. That everybody's mind worked very, very differently on something that looked to be so similar. So many variations in people's minds, it was very, very, quite fun. Oh, okay. All right. Now we have to go back to when I was in college. And now, when I was growing up, I never got any love from my parents. None. Zero. My mother had a terrible postpartum depression with my older sister 2 years earlier, and something happened to her. They said she used to be a normal human being, but, she just wasn't. She just wasn't there, And my father had such intimacy problems that I never heard the word love out of him for my entire 70 years. And so I just never experienced any love from my parents. They provided for me, but that doesn't count. It just doesn't count. And they fought and such that they moved. I was in, 14 neighborhoods and houses and 12 schools by the time I graduated from high school. That's not so bad if you have love in a family, you know. You have military families who move a lot or whatever, you know. If you've got love in the family, you know, or gypsies who move all the time, or, you know, nomads or whatever. If you have love, you know, you have the essence of life. But if you don't have that, you've got nothing, even though you've got everything around you. And I was in terrible shape. I mean, I just thought my heart is just iced by the time I graduated from high school. I couldn't love. I was just in terrible shape, you know. But anyway, so grad school, I went to a psychiatrist to therapy to, you know, help resolve a bunch of these issues, right? And I was in Nichiren Shoshu at the time, and the first thing he says is, Sean, sometimes religion will get in the way of learning in therapy. You know, and the way he said it, that evening I went to the home boot show and I said I quit, you know. And so I found myself in this man's office, sitting there day after day, and I would sit there quietly, and idea would float up into my mind to talk about. And he'd say, Sean, what's on your mind? And we would talk, and I would say those things, you know, and we would quiet. Again, an idea would float up into my mind, and he would say, at that moment, he would say, Sean, what's on your mind? What to talk about? And honest to God, without fail, he every single time, and so I learned, and he never told me we were going to do this, you know. He never sat down and said, this is the way therapy works, and so, right? Never did. But this is what happened. And when I left there, I went up to San Francisco, taught driving, and I would schedule fake students that would give me an hour during the day, and I would pull over, and I would sit there quietly and let it float up into my mind, and I would work it over and finish with that, sit there quietly, and do it just what I did in his office, you know. And that was half a century ago, and I kept doing this, and I developed it more and more. I developed an increasing ability, not just to feel things come up, but I began to learn to go down. And I went down and became more proficient at rummaging around inside, and I've created a couple of videos on YouTube channel called About Diving, which I gave it a name. I had to give it some name. So that was it, because it was going down inside. And one of them is free diving the Mariana Trench. And you would think that there's a bottom, you know, like a sock. You go down and you eventually reach the bottom. But it turns out there isn't. Another surprise. There is no bottom. You go out into the internal universe. You have the external universe, and you have an internal universe. It's very different and also limitless. So so I was talking with a woman who was a housemaker, homekeeper. She was cleaning my apartment. I used to tell her stuff, you know, explain to her stuff. You know, she was 24 and I was 70. So I was just trying to help her out on, you know, savor time in life. And so I would just, I don't know. And one day we were talking, and and she says, "Are you reading my mind?" I said, "What?" And she says, "Are you reading my mind?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, every time you're explaining to me stuff, and every time I have a question that comes into my mind that I want to ask about, you start answering it before I have a chance to say it." Well, this is curious, isn't it? This is very curious, isn't it? Here we have psychiatrists, and what I assimilated, one might say, or from osmosis from him, developed into my life's work, actually. A lot of people have hobbies, They devote many hours and a great deal of money to, and that's, I did this with diving. I sometimes spent many hours resolving things and going inside, and very interesting experiences. I had a black hole, I call it. It was a friend of mine. It was like a big sinkhole about an acre of your front yard. It was a big sinkhole there, and I kept trying to resolve it because it kept causing me to do things I didn't want to do. And what was this black hole, And one morning, this was when I was about 70. One morning, I got up early at 3 a.m. It was gone. I rummaged around inside. It was gone, A constant companion for so many decades or years, and it was gone. Not a trace of it. How did that happen? There was no warning that it was going to go. It was just gone. So I figured in a week or so, give it a time, it'll come back, and it didn't. And there was no, not even a molecule of it having gone, having been there. It was just like a green field was out my front door. Very curious. What happened? I don't know. But it was so important in my life. And yet it disappeared without a sound. I don't know what happened. Just another experience. And one night, about that time, how you have these habits the things you have, they just bug you. Why is it that I do that every time, So one night, this particular thing, I said, okay, the time has come. Time has come to deal with this. And I sat down at 6 p.m., and I started to confront it, right? And I had to become aware of, experience some things about myself that were very difficult. I mean, extremely difficult. The pain was incredible. And sometimes I had to stop and take a breather, 10, 15 seconds or so, right? And just throw myself back in. It was like going back into the white hot cauldron of a volcano. Just go back in. It was terrible. It was so painful, ungodly painful. I had to stop so many times along the way, but I persisted, and about 2 a.m. it was over. It was resolved, And I remember standing at the kitchen counter and going, you know what? For the first time in my life, I did something that I wanted to do. And it reminds me of that story of that Bedouin heating a can of beans in the desert. And a king comes along, who's rushing along, who's beset on all sides by his enemies, right? And he looks at the Bedouin, he says, is that dinner? And the Bedouin says, yes. And the king says, it's not very much. And the Bedouin says, yes, but it's all mine. In other words, he wasn't beset by people trying to take things away from him. So in other words, his life was much calmer and much nicer than the king who had to fear for his life. But that's what I felt like. It was my can of beans, did something for myself finally. I thought that was odd, 70 years old, the first time I actually did something that I wanted to do that was necessary for me. And that was a wonderful experience, Again, another experience, Oh, yes. Let's see, kind of jumping around, but this is the way memories are, aren't they? Going back to, 1984, I think. I was, whatever. Um, um, I just gotten divorced or something, somewhere in there. And, again, one of those things. For some reason, it's the story of my life. For some reason, I got up in the middle of the night and I wandered into the hallway and the presence of God fell over me. I wasn't going to church. Honest to God. I wasn't doing that. I was not involved in anything. It's just the presence of God. If you ever have the presence of God fall over you, you know what I'm talking about. It started and he was there, and I got, so, and he says, I'm going to teach you to pray. He says, I know you can pray, but I'm going to teach you to pray. And the visitation stops and it goes away, right? And then it comes back again, and it's just the presence falls over you. And this time he says, I'm going to teach you to follow your heart. And he may have said a couple other things, and then it went away. And it comes back. And this happened a total of 5 times. But I remember one time that I was standing there, and in my mind, reminded me of those drums that I heard as a child. In the far away, I saw the seat of his essence, of his presence, of his emanation. And the seat, I did not him, of course. But, and every cell in my body, you know what a compass is, when everything turns to the north? Every cell in my body turned towards that like a compass. And I became aware that my body belonged to him. My body was not mine. It was very, very interesting. And then there was me. There was a me. But it was not that. And, I was kneeling, of course. I didn't tell you that. Oh, yeah. When the presence of God falls over, you're going to kneel. Don't worry. Guaranteed. A friend of mine, I told this story to him later the day or something. He says, how do you know it was God? I said, now he was really scoffing. No, he was really this kind of deal. And I said, because of the size of his shoes, that was my comeback, And why? Because there was a pair of my slippers was on the floor where I was kneeling that night, And so it was just like, it seemed like the appropriate comeback to that asshole. Now, there are people who talk to God, and I have done that a couple of times, but you've got to be careful about this because, there was a man who took his 4-year-old child and jumped through a 4-story window, through the glass because he said God told him to. No. We're not talking about the same thing here. Again, that was, but anyway, so that was an experience, and the very interesting thing about the visitation that evening is that when I got up in the morning, there was a very curious thing that happened while he was there, and that is that I got a stream of the only thing it was like a beam of coming from him. It was just coming right into my heart. It was just a beam of love. It was just going into me, and he stopped. So what I did is I did it back to him. It was so funny. I just, okay, Dad, there you go, back again. And so he does it back to me, and he says to me, don't return it, right? I'm like, the guy has a sense of humor. I'll tell you, no, it does, no. But anyway, so the interesting thing is that in the morning, you know how people have all these questions about the existence of God in their mind, in their heart, and they wonder this, and they spiritually wonder that, and all those things, and I had all those questions until that morning, and they were all gone. It was just like they weren't there. It wasn't as though I said, "Oh, I now know," or "Now God," or "I know this." It's just like physiologically, I didn't have the questions. It was just like this sense of fullness, of completeness. Just it was just a wonderful thing that happened to me. And years later, several decades later, I happened to be in the hospital and had so much time, I just started to pray. What am I going to do? Tired of the TV, tired of the old magazines. What am I going to do? Well, I just thought, here we go again. Well, I just thought I'd just start praying, and literally the hours would go by. And one day it said, you know what? I remember God telling me at one time in my life that he was going to teach me to pray. And another time something happened to me, and I said, I seem to remember that God said he was going to teach me to follow my heart, because that had occurred. And so very interesting experiences life has, It's just happened to me. Just bizarre. Why me? Yeah, that I have you ever done that? You go into a situation, just, sometimes publicly I've gone to help somebody out, or somebody's in trouble, and and I'm going, oh, why me? Why am I the one who has to go help at this point? So, anyway, now back when I was 70, sorry about all this jumping around, but whatever. I was out walking one day, and all I can say is, a messenger said, he wants you to be saved. And it wasn't outside hallucination, nor a thought in my own mind. It came from the same place when God had talked to me decades earlier. And so, anyway, I went and tried to accept Christ as my Savior, right? Jimmy Swaggart on TV, why not? Well, they have this thing of speaking in tongues, and so I watched Jimmy Swaggart, the show, for a while, and so I thought, well, one night I said, well, what about, being filled with the Holy Spirit? They started talking, and I'd seen people go down for the altar call, and I said, that night, I said, well, I'll try it, So you put up your hands, you say, oh, fill, you say whatever you say, and you hold your hands up, and you're supposed to get filled with the Holy Spirit, right? And you see people getting filled with the Holy Spirit, and speaking in tongues and stuff, but it didn't happen. It wasn't happening to me. So I said, well, okay, put my hands down, arms down, said, well, I guess it's not happening to me. Maybe another night, I don't know. So I went to bed. I cleaned up the kitchen, went into bed. No sooner had I rolled over in the covers than I started speaking in tongues. It just came out. I could have stopped it, but it was just this inclination and it came out like American Indian language. Not guttural chanting, but just, just something like that, just to the syllables just flowed and flowed and flowed and flowed and flowed, and they just kept going. And this went on for about half an hour or more. I lost track of time. It could have been 45 minutes. And I thought, well, I could stop, but there was something going on, Something was going on, as before, as always. When something's going on in my mind, I don't make it stop because I want to know what it is. So And so after a little bit, that phase, it was just left. It was just evaporated, just like water sinking into the sand. It was gone. But then the quietus. You know, when your computer is downloading something in the background, you can tell something's going on. There's a little thing that's blinking. It says downloading. And that's what's happening. It's just, I knew something was still going on, and I just let it go. And this time, this went on for even longer. And I don't know what was going on, but I just let it go. And then that stopped. In the morning, I got up. Boy, the morning was so different. Anyway, so I have to say about speaking in tongues is it's quite an experience. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. And anyway, so one night I woke up and I don't know if I was speaking in tongues or what. No, I didn't wake up speaking in tongues. One night maybe I was speaking in tongues because I did that on occasion. Well, it has its purpose. It has its function. And anyway, so I became aware that God was listening to me, and he had a question for me. And the question was the same as Solomon. Remember, Solomon was given an opportunity to choose whatever he wanted, and he chose wisdom. Fool that he was. Anyway, so I was aware that I was being given that option. I could choose anything I want. It was God who was listening, and I was going to get whatever gift that I asked for. So I thought, well, now, what should I wish for? What would be a good thing? So I went back over. The story in the Bible occurred to me. You know, Jesus said, love is the most important, God and your neighbor, first commandment, so I can do it, blah, blah, blah. And then there was Paul. And another story in Paul, going further through the Bible, was now I hadn't read the Bible since high school, mind you. This was half a century later. I'm going through the Bible stories, right? I was not big. I didn't go to church. Anyway, so by and large. Anyway, so another story came to mind is Paul, and he said that if you have all these abilities and characteristics and possessions and everything, but you have not love, you have nothing. At this point, some years later, I have to agree with that. And okay, all right, so it was that. And then there was the final one, the third one, that was that faith, hope, and charity, these will abide forever. And of all these, charity or love is the greatest. So I thought, all right, I got 3 opinions here on the best thing that there is, love. Okay, so I said, okay. I said, responding to, you don't have to say God. When you get ready, when you're talking to him, he knows you're talking to him, and you're talking to him. So here, no big deal. So you say, okay, I want love. So you've got to be careful what you ask for, because what happened is that God showed me that his love for humanity, right? He showed me love, for humanity. And, okay, so he does that. And I'm going, no way. Whoa. You think I didn't do that? Huh? I did. I said, wait a minute. That's not what I have in mind. No. I realize you love. I want to be able to love. That, see, okay? We need a do-over. I want the capacity, the ability to love. That's what I'm talking about, And I understand that you've got it. I want this too. And literally, within 30 seconds, he gave me that gift. All I have to say, he gave me that gift, And now, I don't know if he gave me the gift or if the gift was that he made me aware that I already had the capacity and I wasn't aware of where it was or what it was. See, I'd have to ask him again, and I don't want to bother him a third time. He might take it back. Anyway, so that was a very interesting, and that really changed things. Anyway, I got another experience. It just happens. It just happens. Now, here's an interesting one about that same time regarding having questions, spiritual questions. You want to ask. Now, spiritual, well, you call them that. Whatever. I don't like to call them spiritual because they get segregated between real life and the spiritual, and I don't really see any difference. And I had a question, okay, and I can't remember what it was, okay, that I had for God. Okay, now this is about the only questions I've ever had for God of what I related here. I don't do this very often, but I don't do it often at all. But this was at the period of time I had the question I wanted to ask him. It was something about, is something real, or are you real, or I can't remember what. I wanted a definitive answer once and for all. But I said, if you send somebody and he makes an ancillary remark and I'm supposed to interpret it as an answer, I said, I won't believe it because I'll say it's a coincidence. Or if you answer me in this way, I will think that it's probably this and that and another thing. So I said, God, I don't know how you're going to get an answer to me that I'm going to believe that it really came from you, You see the problem? People have signs. Well, did you just stumble across a bunch of sticks and you bumped your head and we thought it was a sign? Really, seriously. If you really want to answer a very serious question about your life as regards, the essence of what you're experiencing here on earth, how are you going to get an answer that's believable for you? You see? And so I said, God, I don't know how you're going to negotiate, my mind and all the safeguards I've got against fraud. I'm not casting aspersions, mind you, but, really, there are some psychological problems here in making your answer believable. And so anyway, of course, with these types of things, you don't get. Sometimes you get an answer right away, and sometimes you just have to wait, and it'll come to you in some form, some fashion. And lo and behold, one day it did. And it was amazing because there it was. It was like the one way I hadn't thought of. It was not, I shouldn't say it that way. It was, I couldn't have conceived that this way existed. And what it was is, it was almost like there was a piece of paper and there was his signature on it. And, it's like the king's wax seal, you put it on and you know that it came from the king. With this case, there was his signature. And it was obviously, you couldn't have duplicated it, it was one of those things, And you say, well, there was no writing there. No. It was blank. But his signature was there. That's what I'm talking about. There's no way to see, this is the deal. You will recognize his signature. I've never seen it before, and I've never seen it since, but that was obviously like a document, and there's a blank place for, you would normally see John Hancock, and that was his signature, but there was no writing there, but it was his signature. Very interesting experience. Now, something comes to mind, and this is something that I ran across, and this is prayer, Now, people will say, well, pray to God, and someone say, well, how come he doesn't answer my prayer? And people say, well, he doesn't answer your prayers all the time, and he answers some prayers, and that, you know how people are like this, right? Prayer is this, and maybe he will, and maybe he doesn't, or, well, I discovered that prayer works 100% of the time. The deal is that it is an ability just like archery. You get better at it, and you need to practice it in a certain way. In other words, if you make a request, you have to pay attention to your psychodynamics, your physiology of how you're behind, where your heart is in asking as you're asking. Some people say of the heart or sincere. These just represent certain physiological aspects when a person attempts to make a successful prayer. It's like trying to make a successful triple axel or something, okay? You need to pay attention to all the different attributes of the circumstances when you're making your prayer. And then you need to correlate how successful your prayer is, because it's not a matter of you get it all or you get it none. Actually, when you pray, some parts of it are going to be successful, and so you begin to hone in on what aspects create a successful prayer outcome so that you get what you're praying for. And as you get attuned to what posture, so to speak, of all the attributes have to be in a line in a certain way, you'll realize that that prayer will be successful according to how you formulated it, under the conditions that you formulated it. That's what you're going to get. People say, well, can you then pray for anything and get everything? Well, you have to be able to formulate the right attributes of the prayer. And your capacity and capabilities and abilities will limit to what you can do. Some people can pray for the same thing, but some people have more capabilities or whatever. They can be successful in that prayer, and you cannot be as successful. But anyway, so that's just one of those things that I came to understand by my own experience, that prayer is a matter of, those things. So there was another one. These are like potato chips. There was another one. I was lying in bed, well, actually on a bed, day bed, one day in Portland, and I was sunny, just relaxing, 10 o'clock or so, and this scenario started playing in my brain, right? Not unlike a daydream. And so I just allowed it to go on, just kind of partook in it. And it was about a woman being picked up by a couple of young men in a car. And they were taking her to a remote location. They took all her clothes and raped her for a bit, and then took her somewhere, and let her out. And they kept her clothes, and they took off. And it's kind of odd, don't you think, to let this kind of scenario play in your brain? And then a couple of other guys came by in a car, and she asked for help, right? So they let her in the car, and they took her somewhere and raped her. Talk about luck. Anyway, so and then the scenario kind of dissipated, just left. And so anyway, later that morning, lunchtime or something, I was listening to the radio and a little bit of news. And the newscaster came on, and he said, well, there was a woman in North Portland who got picked up by a couple of young men, and they told the story, and raped and took her clothes, and another couple of young men raped her, and there you go. Just saying that, this type of communication is extant. Just an experience. I was not into the ESP or any kind of this telecommunication at all. It's just a matter of the brain waves, or just putting this stuff out. I just happened to be a recipient on that day. Again, I wasn't into anything of this stuff. As you see, all these experiences, I'm not into anything. They just happened to me. It just happened to me. And that was just another one. Very interesting. All right, so I think it's another one is going back to 1972. I've been up from San Diego, from grad school there, and now I was in Portland, Oregon. And this one, I'd had some internal things that I was trying to resolve, some internal pain, as you know, childhood. But this was actually from having taken LSD as a hippie. There was some some problems that had created. Anyway, so this particular day on Whitaker Street, Water Ave, I can't remember, near the Ross Island grocery store there, I had a bit of a fever. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. That was another experience, the double helix. This one is a fever. I had a fever, and as it progressed, I began feeling better and better internally in some way. It may have been that the fever was necessary for some internal corrective processes to occur. And there's a very interesting note about fever is often usually thought of to be a sickness, whereas maybe the body was heating up in order that a restorative process could take place. And I'm not sure about what at this time, as I sat up on the couch, or maybe it was another time. I can't remember if these two were related or at different times, but at this, that was one time when I was having a fever and laying down. It was not a delirious fever. It was only maybe 101 or something like that. This other time with a double helix, and this seems to be a different process, perhaps. And I was sitting on the couch. No, this time I did not have a fever. Right, this was different. I did not have a fever this time. I was sitting on the couch, again, the same apartment, and in my mind's eye, almost like an internal virtual reality, there was a double helix. You know how you see these sci-fi films, and in people gather around this thing that's suspended in the air, that's kind of like what it was. It was a double helix suspended there. And this was, the double helix has just been discovered only a couple years earlier. And so I didn't know a lot about it, but and why this was, I don't know, double helix here. But a curious thing is that that as I was watching it, it wasn't moving, but I was watching it, a little light came at the bottom, a little kind of the helix was in kind of like a dull greenish, and a little light, kind of like whitish, came up and started up one of the branches. You know how they curve up, and you have one of the arms, the two arms, and the branches go across, and started up one of the arms, and it got to a branch, and it paused and sent a pulse of light across the branch. And it seemed to be seeing it was correct, or it was correcting things as it went up. It was paused at each one momentarily, and a little thing would go across, and each one kind of varied at each branch. It went up, And so as it went up, some internal problems that I'd been working on began to be resolved little by little with each correction or each place it paused, and it would get a little brighter when it paused at a branch, and then it would go, then it would dull down. It wouldn't dull. It would luminosity would go down, and it would go up to the next one and repeat that. You were getting better and better. Now, this was 40 years ago, and some questions came to mind. Is that where did that corrective molecule come from within the brain? Where was this double helix within the brain? What did it represent? In other words, there were some problems that are uncomfortableness that I was feeling. Where were they? Why at this time was this corrective molecule made? Where was it made? How was it made? How did it know where to go? The double helix molecule, what did that represent? Did that represent a collective molecule of a particular location, regulatory location, a regulatory organ within the brain, and this was a collective model, visualization of it? Or was there in fact just one molecule, like a queen bee, that regulated all the others in that location for that particular organ? Well, these are very interesting questions. And now, of course, I was wondering, and I was, this was not a very useful experience at the time because, of course, there was no research in this area at the time. And so I kind of watched the literature over the decades. And now, you see, we're getting into engineered molecules that go into the body to specific locations and perform specific functions. We've got modified stem cells. We've got a lot of stuff that's going on that indicate that we are approaching where this type of experience may be useful. And so I contacted a number of researchers in an area called neuromolecular psychiatry, because that seemed like it might be a useful thing to know about in that area. But of course, people who are scientists, even though I have a degree in physics and some grad work in physics, I still am open to walking on any ground that I can walk on. Not both sides of the fence, but on any ground that there is to walk on. I'm open to experience of various kinds, and this seems to be a useful thing because one can internally access things that science will take decades and millennia in order to understand and get instruments for. Anyway, so you can imagine somebody in research getting an experience like this and giving any credence to it, but just the same, I tried that. Anyway, so the double helix experience, again, just another experience that happened to me. I had no training in it, no advance notice. Well, okay, that was 40 years ago. Then I had one experience, a couple years ago that was very interesting. And this is where, when you can go inside, you can actually go inside and make changes and find useful things. And you can see all kinds of interesting things internally, not just useful things, but it's terribly useful landscape. And of course, you have access to the universe, which is limitless, etc. But this one is, I had a situation where I call it autoplay. I've got to give here's some organs within the brain. I've got to give them names so we can talk about them. This particular function is called autoplay. And when you have a scenario in your mind, now suppose you're composing a letter or a talk that you want to give before an audience. And so you go over it in your mind, right? Here you go, you give the talk in your mind, right? And a little while later, you do it again, and you make adjustments, and you edit it, and okay. And and you may take it again before you write it down and do it again. Well, autoplay, this particular problem that I was having with autoplay is that this particular function of the play wouldn't give me any rest. There was a particular thing that I was working on. It would run through it, and I'd make the editing, and it would start in it right again and replaying it right again for me to edit right again. And it just kept going and going and going. And it showed no signs of stopping. I mean, more than a day and a half, And so one morning I sat down and said, I got to handle this one. I got to take care of this one. So the autoplay was playing, right? So I went inside, and I went to the place where this particular organ was autoplaying things. And I kind of perused it, looked at it. It was kind of shaped like a kidney bean, not too big. And kind of looking at it, and then I noticed that coming into the top of it was a little bit of a pulse would come in. And that would stimulate it to autoplay. It would get the end, and pulse would come in, autoplay. It would play it, autoplay. So we're getting a pulse coming in. So I looked a little further upstream to where that pulse was coming from. And there was another organ that was doing the pinging, right? The pinging. So I'm going, well, what in the heck? Why is it doing the pinging then? Because that's what's causing the autoplay. So I look at the pinging. It was a much smaller organ, roundish in shape, and the ping would go down into the other organ and the autoplay. And so I wonder, now why is it doing that? And so I looked at it functioning for a bit, and then I said, okay, what is it concerned about? Why is it doing this? And then I realized that in my inbox, there was something in my inbox. Now, inbox, I mean something comes into your mind, into your brain that you need to work on, right? Something exterior. It's not something that you think up. It's something that comes in from someplace else, from outside source comes in to your inbox for you to think about, write down, or something, okay, to work out, whatever. Okay, and this little concerned organ was pinging because I had something in the inbox that I wasn't recording. And see, that's one of my tasks, is I'm supposed to record my inboxes, right? Everybody, you're supposed to do that. That's why it's there. And so I realized that it was concerned that I got all the nutrients or all the information out of that email, that inbox, so it wasn't lost. So I thought, well, tell you what, if I write this down in enough detail, then I can recall it all later. Then this little concerned organ can stop it, what it's doing, right? So I wrote that down, and at the moment I put the period in the notebook, at the end of that little recounting there, the auto playing stopped. That concerned organ stopped, and I realized I had to do, and it has never come back, because I have always paid attention when I get something in the inbox like that, is to write down enough notes. Maybe 3 words is enough to reconstitute the whole idea later, or maybe it needs to be 14 pages, see, sometimes. And so that's just an example of when you can dive, when you get some expertise and experience on diving, that you can actually do some very useful things, and you can actually learn some very useful things. It will be a very long time before science, because of its logical external approach, will ever know what I was talking about. We'll ever know, we'll be able to describe that, we'll be able to actually manipulate those things, we'll ever, who knows if they will ever get to those things, But that's the thing about diving, is you can experience the totality of your life in completeness. If you wait on science to tell you things, you're never going to get complete stuff. Intellectually, you can never describe life. Your internal life. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and you can't describe life. Well, so that's just another experience. Diving is very useful. Hobby of mine. That psychiatrist taught me, as one might say, taught. I remember sometimes these things will save your life. It's important to pay attention to the illogical, kind of unexpected, accidental happenings in your life. Not as interruptions, but as important adjuncts to the more fundamental reality behind life. Your intellect kind of goes along, creating kind of a sanitized view of life, and then the true reality of life comes in certain ways. I remember I was talking with this guy. I don't know where he came from. He seemed like I think he was homeless, maybe. I don't remember. This was 40 years ago. And it was kind of strange. I don't know. And about an hour or so later, I decided to go to another store and get some food. A mile or two away. And I picked up some stuff and a can of sardines, and I was at the checkout, and there he is, and he says that can of sardines is bad. I said, what? He says that it's been opened. Look at this oil. He says, you can't eat that. I go, oh, well, thank you. And I didn't know what happened to him. Well, I used to hike the Columbia Gorge, for 30 years, day in, day out, all kinds of weather, ice, storms. I mean, you name it. Every day of the week, every hour of the day. Loved it, still love it, fell in love with it. What a place. I wrote a poem. On snow-draped shadows, down a windy ridge, arrives your lover in her moonlit carriage. A night so deep, a deepness so bright, shadow life forms by the sun of the night. She dreams of you in the night of her day, now she beckons you to come away. Full moon. 1985. Anyway, so I was decided to hike Nesmith Point one winter afternoon, overcast, pulled into the parking lot next to the water tank, and it was like 2, 3 in the afternoon. Nobody in the parking lot, overcast, winter day. Not too bad for temperature. I had a light jacket on, so I started hiking up. Oh, I got about halfway up, and, any little snow, and so I knelt down to pray for a wife, a good woman, and so I wanted to get married, and I was having trouble finding somebody, and so I did that, and I didn't know how to ask, what to ask for. You say, well, what kind of a person? I said, all I could think of was just you handle it. Just give me a good woman. Just that's all I want. Just that's all I can think of. Okay. So and then I went on to start hiking up further, and so the snow began to the drifts began to cover the path. So I kept going, and then it was there was no path anymore. I mean, it was just all snow, and eventually I got up closer and closer near the top, and I was walking on about 3 feet of snow at that point, packed down kind of, and the afternoon was getting on, and it began to snow, and I continued walking up to the top. I'd been up once before, and so then it began to blow a little harder, and it was kind of turning into a little bit of a blizzard. not to be deterred. I thought, well, I looked back at my footprints and they were disappearing. There's a problem here because the trees are so far apart, you can't see where the path is. So if you can't see your footprints, you're SOL, so to speak. And so I thought, well, maybe I should turn around. Well, my impression, having been up there before, is that it was serpentine, like coiled, like a snake. So you could go from one, you could cut across down and pick up it further down. And since my footprints were disappearing, getting blown over, the snow was blowing pretty good now, and the wind and everything, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just cut off to the right here, and and pick up the trail further down, save some time, so because I'll pick it up further down where I can see where there's a trail in the trees and everything. So I'm thinking about this, right? And because I don't really want to do that, but in the footprints now they're going, they're just almost completely gone. And I have got a ways to go, and I am getting a little bit upset, I'm going, this is, I guess I'm going to cut here, And so I'm just picking out the tree to where I'm going to cut to the right. Now, to the right, of course, this was not serpentine. Actually, if I'd cut to the right here, it would have been Larch Mountain Wilderness, okay? And this was like 4 p.m, blizzard setting in. I had a fall jacket on. That was it. Nothing to eat. When I'd stop to pray, I ate. left some for the animals, as part of the prayer, so to speak. Anyway, so I'm just ready to step off to the right, and I look down, and there is a man's right footprint, 2 inches deep, just as crisp as though it was just done. And there's a left and a right, and he's walking down the path. And just at the moment, they had just appeared. And the interesting thing is there was no set of footprints coming up the other way. There was no set of footprints where he would have turned around. It was obvious they had just been made. In the blizzard, they would have, very short, they would have begun to get soft edges. But it wasn't. I'm telling you, it was just like that. It was just right, just as crisp as though it just made it, and just left, right, left. I took off running. Down, that was all I needed. I didn't want these things to disappear. But just took off running. And, as close as he must have been behind me, honest to God, but there was no set coming up. So, go figure. Never did. And I got to the place where you could hear, hundreds of feet down the scree, the cutbacks, and couldn't hear anybody, couldn't see anybody, all the way down to the parking lot. I hustled all the way down to the park because I didn't know if the blizzard was going to close in all the way down there too, right? And maybe close down 84. It could be a real problem. So, but never did. Here, got back to the parking lot, no sign of other car ever having been there, just, I thought about it, just how could such a thing happen, Well, could speculate, but I just don't know. But there was just no other set of footprints. There was no place the person would have had to turn around. Just saying. That's what I observed, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, so that was just another experience. At the time I was saved, I wrote about the experiences and put it on a website called concernforpeoples.net. And I took it down. Well, I put a private note up over it later, number of years later, because something else had happened. But while I was a member of the caravanserai, allowed in, got kicked out 3 times. They're supposed to be accommodating of strangers, but anyway, so a guy asked me, well, what about your commitment to Christ? How come you didn't, inform us of that? I don't know why I should have, but anyway, so I answered. And I made a video that, well, things change. And that is that our lives, our spiritual development area, at some point our DNA is going to ask us to have some spiritual development. We're like caterpillars, rummaging around, eating this and eating that, and then we go into a cocoon, and as a chrysalis, we go inside and we are born again, right? We become changed, and we emerge as a butterfly, and we leave the cocoon and fly off. Well, people have asked me, well, do you have faith? And I said, no, I don't have faith. And they said, well, you obviously don't believe in God then, So, well, no. Actually, faith is a stage. Agnosticism and disbelief and doubt is a stage of a caterpillar. Faith is a stage of the chrysalis, the cocoon. And internally, you have to have internal nutrients that help you mature. And when you become a butterfly, you emerge from your cocoon or faith, and you take off. And you no longer need faith. If you go back to the cocoon as a butterfly, it wouldn't be the right thing. It would be damaging to you. So faith was useful to a point. Faith is not useful to an agnostic. Faith is not useful in a period of time of maturation. And then as a butterfly, you have other things to do and other places to go. And somebody asked me, so that was an experience, that this actually happened to me, and that's why a story comes like it does. And somebody asked me, he was giving me some advice or something, and he thought he was, reach in and say, he says, do you believe in God? And I, the way he said it, at this point, I said, this is gonna, you can hear what's coming, it's kind of like a dichotomous choice, and I hesitated, and he saw that. He said, it's either yes or a no, he says. And I said, now he's put me on the spot, so I'm going to have to answer, kind of, I guess, respond. And I said, well, maybe there's something more. And he goes, to his credit, he goes, well, what do you mean? And I say, do you believe in ice cream? He says, yeah, sure. I says, have you had it? He says, yeah. I said, well, then it's no longer a matter of belief then, is it? The question is, what do you do with something like this? I don't know what he ever did with it. Spiritual maturation or, puberty or, I don't know, when your brain goes from concrete to abstract thinking, they're all maturation of various stages, and having a child and children, bringing up children is a stage, and you mature as an adult. When you're a child, you take from your parents or whoever, and your milk from your mother, and you grow. You have to take in order to grow. But as an adult, you have to give in order to grow. It's a different stage of life. The only way for an adult to grow is to give. Identify actual needs and give at those moments when somebody's in need. That's the only way for an adult to mature. But in terms of spiritual growth, maturation, you have your DNA asks you for various foods, right? Your DNA is for you personally, right? It wants fries and a hamburger with ketchup, no mayonnaise. Okay, that's your DNA. Okay, and your DNA wants you to, at one point, go through a spiritual maturation, just like it did puberty or physical. or whatever. And so the question is, how attuned are you to your impulses from your DNA? Your DNA wants something. It wants you hungry. How soon do you, before you get, maybe, and how insistent you are in being hungry, your DNA has set your chemistry up for you to respond and bring things, to it. Well, what about your the time delay? In terms of if your brain wants you to for something, how soon does it take for you to get it? Well, I'm going to take a side trip here just because I just remembered something, and we'll come back to this, your DNA maturation here. But the interesting thing about the brain was they did some studies in terms of brain damage, and on Americans, I believe it was, and they had the same area brain damaged as the Japanese, I think it was. And they found that the Americans couldn't speak while the Japanese could. And what they found is that those people with that type of brain damage, when they transcripted things from letters, alphabet, into language, they couldn't speak. But the Orientals could, because they didn't use that particular organ of the brain for transcripting that wasn't damaged. Well, this presents a very interesting thing, because if you see something, suppose you're on a train and the scenery's going by. If you have a transcripting brain of an alphabet, you're reading subtitles, because your brain is transcripting things into words. Like, there's a mountain. Of course, it's going to miss a lot, isn't it? Because words are necessarily limited. They take time. The transcripting process takes time. The scenery is going by continually. So, an Oriental, on the other hand, would perceive things differently than this, because they have ideograms, hieroglyphs were similar, pictorial representations of something. And of course, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So if you have a picture of something, you have a great deal of information than you have, in one word. If you have window, or you have a picture of a window, you have all the scenery that's there and everything, right? So you have a lot more information, and you see a lot more about what's going on. So this is one of the basis for saying that why from the East we have all the great teachers. You have Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Rumi, Baha'u'llah. Who else? Buddha, I can't remember. So many. From the East, you have Will Smith from Baltimore, Oregon. You know what I'm saying? And the way that the world and life is perceived by people's minds is they have other organs that they can use, that if you're transcripting, the brain is severely truncating the information that's being viewed. And I have had the experience of seeing my brain perceive something in its totality and then begin the transcripting process. The circumstances have to be very unusual, but it's a very, very short time delay from when your brain perceives something and then it begins transcripting and sending this truncated, desiccated version of what it's doing, But it was an experience, just another one of those experiences. And the brain can, under various circumstances, experience things that are very unusual. Another one was, in terms of time delay, is I was sleeping one night, And I woke up in the middle of the night, and I heard this. And that was curious, and I heard it again. And what I discovered was that I was scratching myself once, and I was hearing an echo. And so the echo was coming back from the wall of the bedroom, right? I scratched on my hip, and it came back. Well, realize the head of the bed was only like 5 feet from the wall. So that means the sound was traveling all of 10 feet. And I was hearing very clearly the time delay. If sound travels 1,100 feet a second, that means I was distinctly hearing a time delay of 1/100th of a second. And that means, just like the transcripting process, the time delay, it has to be unusual circumstances to hear these kinds of things. Because, we often have a lot of stuff going on in our head, conversations, and we're listening to music and all these kinds of stuff that we, it's like in your apartment, in your brain, if you have all this stuff going on in your brain, you really can't be cognizant or even hear things that are important, maybe, on the outside, And that's why it's an interesting thing that Rumi said, if silence is genuinely inside of you, it will bring you what you need, live in silence, He didn't mean not talk, he just mean internally, keep your mind clear. So, if you're going into a class in mathematics, or if you're going in to have a conversation with somebody, or you're just thinking about life, you can perceive things more accurately, That's just a real life example of that. So anyway, getting back to this thing about the DNA and the maturation stages of spirituality, if you have your DNA sending you the request and getting it back to it, why is there have to be a separation between you and your DNA? If you are in your body, why aren't you closer, so to speak? In other words, how close can you actually? If you are you and your body is there with your DNA, why is there a felt separation? I mean, how come you aren't your body simultaneously? In other words, isn't there a way, or suppose there is a way, where you could become one with your body or your DNA, so that when you did something, you were your DNA, So you have your DNA and you, so kind of like, who's the potter and who's the pot, you see? And so if these two could become one, then you might hear a response out of the duo, I am. If they become fused, there would be only one voice saying, I am. You might have, the DNA the cause and you the effect or something. Isn't it interesting that there's the I am God is kind of interesting, or the simultaneity of cause and effect and those kinds of things. If I had, say that I had a belief, my belief would be in the law of cause and effect, basically. That's about it. Because, why? Because if the law of cause and effect doesn't exist, it didn't work, you'd have nothing to go on, right? I mean, if you picked your nose and your teeth fell out, the next time you picked your nose and your shoes got tied, if you couldn't correlate one thing with another, how would you ever do anything? You pick up a spoon of cereal and your house catches on fire. I mean, it'd just be, we would not exist as a human race, folks. The law of cause, people say everything changes. No. The law of cause and effect is immutable. The law of cause and effect doesn't change. Thank God. Anyway, this has been your Backyard Mystic, LOL, fun and games in life, And I would have to say at this point, I have learned that the unexpected is now expected, because I have learned that around the corner, there's another corner, and every experience could be life-changing or not. I don't know. Honest to God, I don't know. My mother and father, they never prepared me for this. But now, it seems like just the unexpected is just life. And that is life, just because you don't know. I mean, you can drive 5 minutes and something will happen and it'll change your life, or you'll change your corner, or something. Constantly something new. It's just a way of life.